Hello. Thank you so much for sticking it out with me and
Sure.
for coming on. Um, can you please introduce yourself and talk about your organization?
Sure. My name is John Opdycke. I'm the president of Open Primaries. We're a national organization working to enact open primaries all over the country. And, um, it's a very simple organization. We're premised on the belief that nobody should be required to join a political party in order to fully participate in our democracy. And we work with activists and business leaders and community and civic leaders all over the country to try to make this change.
Absolutely. Um, so, I was looking at some of your stats, and if you guys are on Twitter or Facebook, but if you guys are on Twitter especially, they have some really incredible studies, articles, even memes, um, all kinds of fun stuff to really get educated about this. I was one of the bajillions of people who went to Occupy DNC in 2016 to kind of protest some of these things like closed primaries. And I, I heard story after story about people's registrations being switched without their requesting it. And in closed primaries, that being said, they weren't able to vote.
Right.
What is your thought on that?
Well, it's funny that the the political parties are very strange animals in that they're private organizations. There's no mention of parties in the Constitution. They're private associations, just like the NRA or the ACLU or the Boy Scouts or, you name it. And yet the parties have very successfully kind of merged themselves with government in a million different ways. And one of those ways is voter registration. So it varies state to state. But one of the kind of cruel and unusual features is that the parties use this governmental function, which is, registering to vote, to build their private membership rolls. And so you end up in these situations where on election day, the parties are kind of the gatekeepers and they determine who can vote and who can't vote. Some states have better rules than others. Some states don't have partisan registration, but they keep track of who votes in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary, and they use that as part of building their membership rolls. So it's a poorly designed construct if you're a voter. It's a geniusly designed construct if you're a party wanting to use tax dollars to build your private membership rolls. And so I think kind of connected to the whole issue of opening up the primaries at a deeper, more philosophical level is how do we get the political parties into an appropriate, a proper position in our democracy? No one's saying parties should be outlawed, but they shouldn't be running the process of elections. They should be participating,
Sure.
not making the rules, not making the regulations, not making the requirements for the voters. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sure.
Before you got on, I was actually kind of loosely discussing, a state like New York has to, register 8 to 10 months in advance.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even know who the candidates are at that point.
Yeah, and it's
So there was
interesting.
something.
Yeah. New York, they just passed a whole sweeping set of election reforms, but they didn't touch this.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at, this is one of my big beefs with the Democratic Party, is they like to talk a lot about voter access, challenging some of the outrageous rules put together by the Republicans, voter ID, things like that. But they cling to the party control of the process itself. So the whole issue of the lockbox, registration deadlines, open primaries, that wasn't touched at all in this latest round in New York.
Yeah, and The New York came out um, and said that they illegally purged voters, something like 130,000.
Yeah.
And we know that's happened other places as well. So, it's so, like, it kind of makes sense why people feel so defeated that they don't want to vote. I mean,
Yeah.
do you think that more people would vote if we had open primaries?
Well, I don't think it's so cause and effect. I think there's lots of situations where you can have an open system and yet people don't feel empowered. I don't want to make a kind of A to B claim that simply doing this reform would automatically lead to higher turnout. And in fact, you saw in many closed primary states this last election, people found a way to participate. So it's not that simple. But in general, what you create when you open up the system, when you kind of lessen the party control of the system, is you create more opportunities and possibilities, not just of people participating, but of candidates and movements and uh, citizen expressions that break out of the boxes of political correctness, of party silos, of people coming together that don't really, conform to the left, center, right paradigm. You just create opportunities for some unusual things to happen. And I'm a big believer that the American people want and need to come together in some new formations, in some new ways that are weird. I think that, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I I disagree with everything he does. And yet I get why millions of people voted for him. I get that he presented people with a weirdness, with a kind of a, hey, we're not going to do politics in the same old conventional ways, that attracted many, many people, many of whom regret having voted for him. But nonetheless, I think progressives need to really, really get behind shaking up the election system so that some new things can emerge, new things that don't fit into some neat boxes. Now, that's a controversial opinion. There's many progressives that disagree with that, but I like having that debate and having that argument.
Do you think that progressives disagree with that? I always find it's more like neolibs disagree. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah, no,
but
I mean, again, I think I don't like to kind of reinforce categories. I'm
right, right.
saying broadly speaking, I think that ironically, um, the left can be very conservative on the
Oh
issue
yeah,
of opening up the system. The left, broadly defined, from Clintonian liberals to socialist activists. I think that the issue of, hey, let's deregulate democracy, let's open it up and trust that the American people can do some new things and some creative things. There's a lot of people on the left and a lot of people on the right who really want are afraid of that, and they
sure.
they want to change things, but they also want to keep things comprehensible. And I think we have to embrace the certain kind of the chaos, the unknowing moment that we're in, and not fight it. And I think it's a mistake when progressives adopt a more conservative position around, let's throw some things up in the air. Let's try some new things.
Absolutely. Um, the interesting thing is, I mean, I've interviewed over 100 candidates from across the
Okay.
country, and I've learned so many different ways that voting set up. Like, Washington State open primaries, but vote by mail only.
Right.
There's all these weird things. And so I guess one of the probably most common questions you get asked is, why are some states open, some states are semi open, and some states are closed?
Complicated question. You know, it really goes back to the, you know, the Constitution, which gives states the power to kind of create their own electoral systems. A lot of primaries are new. They're a 20th century phenomenon. They came out of the progressive era, and they were driven by West Coast progressives coming out of California and other parts of the West. So west of the Mississippi, you tend to have more open systems. East of the Mississippi, you tend to have systems that came around in the 19th century where you had more, you know, kind of machine politics and so forth. And then in the South, there was a whole move to create open primaries and nonpartisan registration as part of dismantling Jim Crow, because there was a long history of partisan Democratic whites only primaries in the South. So there was a civil rights aspect to creating open primaries in states like Alabama and Georgia. So it's a real kind of historical patchwork that has to do with the political fights of the 20th century.
So it's kind of, you know, ironic in a way, because I was looking at your stats on your page and it was saying that, let's see, I think it was 30% of African Americans are independent.
Yeah.
So almost like, okay, let's create, you know, primaries to, you know, negate Jim Crow and progress on that, but then let's also, you know, keep the poor and disenfranchised and what have you out from voting.
Yeah, and you know, there's a shift taking place in the country, in the African American community, which, you know, very recently was completely understood as a lockstep Democratic Party constituency. And certainly while African Americans continue to vote heavily for Democrats, they identify more, particularly younger African Americans, as independent voters. And yet there's not been an acknowledgement of that. There's not been a recognition of that. In fact, independent voters, I'm an independent. This is something that happens all the time whenever they do a poll. They'll do a poll and they'll say, you know, we've discovered that 40% of Americans are independent, 35 are Democrat, and 25 are Republican. But those independents are not really independents. Half of them are Democratic leaners, the other half are Republican leaners. So really, there's only 6% that are real independents. And it's a clever way to kind of basically, you know, disappear this emerging constituency and basically get them back into the two-party boxes and not have to deal with the fact that more and more Americans, including people of color, including young people, I mean, the stats among young people are astounding. It's over 50% in most states.
Right.
People don't want to join a party. They want to be free to vote for the best candidate. They want to have mobility, just like they do in tech, in their work, in, you know, life. And yet the whole framework, even in states that have open primaries, most of them, you still have to choose a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot.
Yeah.
You can't vote for a Democrat over here and a Republican over here. The only states that have really opened it up are California, Washington, and Nebraska, where voters can choose from all the candidates in the first round. But there's a real tussle right now, and I think something's going to break in the future, which is that independents are fighting for recognition, and the political establishment from both parties is insisting that independents are not really independent. It's very insulting, actually.
Absolutely. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And if you don't go Dem, the voter shame is just epic. So that's another thing I was thinking about. If we had open primaries, I feel like the voter shaming would be just so much lessened and people wouldn't be as discouraged. But also, you know, as far as opening primaries in all states, What do you think are some of the drawbacks?
Well, it's funny because I don't think there's any. And people say, well, if you open it up, and this frequently gets said about California, they'll say, well, you opened it up and then this result happened, or this person got elected that I don't like, or
Sure.
this. And frankly, I don't think that the success of open primaries can be looked at by, what the results are. I think people are going to vote for who they vote for, including probably some people I think people shouldn't have voted for them. We all feel that way. I think that in some ways, what all open primaries does, all it does is create possibility. It creates the possibility for some new things to happen. It does not guarantee that anything new is going to happen. It doesn't guarantee anything. All kinds of shitty results are still going to result in an open system. I think oftentimes people think about reform as if you enact it and then you get the results that you want. And that's not how democracy works. And I wish it was that easy, but it's not. But I firmly believe, and I might be wrong, that I frankly just trust the American people more than I trust the political parties. Look at what's going on right now in Washington. The political parties are concerned about one thing and one thing only, and that is maintaining an edge over the other political party. They'll shut down the government. They'll keep people from getting paid. They don't care what the costs are for the American people. They put their political interests above the country's interest morning, noon, and night. I trust the American people, if they had more power, if they had more say, would probably do a bunch of stupid things. But I'll take that. I will take that any day of the week over these self-interested political parties controlling the show and making sure that nothing new under the sun can emerge, that we stay in this kind of frozen storm of partisan warfare. The American people, we're going to have to grow. We're going to have to step up to the plate. We're going to have to mature. We're going to have to do new things. But we can't do that in a system where we really don't have the power to try some new things, and including some things that fail, that go wrong, that are mistakes. But I'm pro mistake. I like mistakes.
Absolutely. Better than not trying, for sure. I think you're so spot on as far as a control thing. It's really the antithesis of democracy. Um, do we have democracy if we're not allowed to vote for the candidate we want because of a label on our registration card?
Yeah, no, we don't. And I think that, the history of America, not let me rephrase that, not the history of America, but a history of America, is the ongoing struggle to give more power and more opportunities to ordinary people. I mean, that's the women's suffrage movement, that's the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, we've been fighting to make a more perfect democracy since 1787, since the Constitution was written down. And that's a good and a positive process, and it's not over. And I think it's actually really hard right now because I think there's a very strong propaganda or education or effort to kind of get people to think that the problems in our democracy are limited to the most blatantly restrictive things like voter ID laws or voter purging, or just the things that are really examples of physically keeping people from casting a ballot. It's much more sophisticated than that. It's a much more nefarious, kind of deep-seated matrix of rules and regulations that even when people are allowed to vote, as you're saying, they're presented with preordained candidates that they can choose from. They're not allowed to do anything weird. They're not allowed to flip-flop around and candidates, and this is interesting. I talked to a lot of people running for office and a lot of people who've been elected to Congress. They will say, and they'll always say this off the record, they'll never say it publicly. They can't stand the fact that when they run for office, the first thing they have to do in the primary is they have to just campaign to the party faithful. If they're a Democrat, they only got to go talk to the Democratic activists. If they're a Republican, they got to go talk to the right wing. They can't stand the fact that they can't, from day one, just go out and talk to their constituents, people that agree with them, people that disagree with them. They want the freedom to be able to represent all of their constituents, but they don't have that freedom. Members of Congress are as victimized by this as ordinary voters. Not to, that's a little bit of a stretch, but
well, no, I a congressman told me that as well, so I hear you. But no, I mean, if you're a good statesman, not a politician necessarily, but a good statesman, you would get mad that you can't talk to everyone because you're representing everyone. One of the other things I wanted to ask you, let's see. Oh, yes. You stated that 50% of millennials, over 50% of millennials are independents. So that being said, what do you, that being their first election experience, what would you like to see? Can we do anything by 2020?
Well, yes. I'm very proud to report, very pleased to report that broadly speaking, beyond even open primaries, the movement to restructure our democracy is growing exponentially all over the country. I mean, gerrymandering reform is picking up a lot of steam. There was a very successful effort in Florida to restore felon voting rights. Over 1 million people there now who are barred can now participate. Open primaries bills are being introduced from Maine to Pennsylvania. We have a lawsuit in New Mexico to bar the use of taxpayer funding for closed primaries. There's an effort that's starting to emerge in Florida to put a referendum on the ballot. People are dealing with things like trying some new voting systems like ranked choice voting. There's a kind of a creative laboratory that is growing by leaps and bounds all over the country. How much law change are we going to affect by 2020? I don't know. However, one of the things we're focused on is the presidential primaries. And here's a quirk of the presidential primaries. The parties could actually open up their primaries to independents without having to change the law. They could simply change their rules. And we're looking to put pressure on both the Democratic state parties and the Republican state parties to open up their primaries in 2020. How successful we're going to be, I don't know. It's inside baseball. The rules writing process is not a democratic activity. It's behind closed doors, small groups of party activists and leadership write the rules. If we're lucky and we catch a couple breaks, we might be able to get some of the state parties to open up their primaries in 2020. That happened in 5 states in 2016, in Nebraska and Idaho, California, South Dakota, and Oklahoma. And I'm hoping that we can add to that. There's also a controversy in the Republican Party where the Trump campaign and the RNC are actually indicating they might try to cancel the primaries altogether, which is not surprising, but they're looking to kind of shield President Trump from any kind of challenge from within the Republican Party. So it's going to be a hotly contested arena on open primaries, but there's a broader movement that goes even beyond the primary reform movement that is just, I can't tell you how much growth is taking place right now. When I started open primaries in 2014, the issue of structural reform was extremely marginal, very, very, on the outskirts of the real political conversation. It's now, I don't want to say it's smack dab in the middle, but we're in the mainstream. We're part of the national conversation about about politics. And people are, to your question about young people, I was, not personally, but I saw a video from a hearing in Florida where a young man drove from Key West to Miami just to get 2 minutes at a microphone to describe his experience of voting for the first time. He went to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary, and the little old lady at the polling booth said, "Sorry, you can't vote. You're a registered independent." And he was this is a guy who'd been knocking on doors for Bernie for months. And he was so kind of angry and irked and bewildered that we have this system set up where he had no idea, that he just figured if it's an election, it's taking place at a school, it's being run, I can vote. Why would I not be able to vote? And yet 3.5 million independents in Florida weren't allowed to vote in the last presidential primary. But what's new is that that's now news, and people are aware of that. In years past, that just was, hey, that's just the way it is.
Right, right. That's so heartbreaking. A lot of people had their party switched without their knowledge. And at Occupy DNC, I met an actual delegate, who couldn't vote for
Yeah.
Bernie. It's so heartbreaking because it's like that. I just can't fathom. It's like you're being raped of your democratic right. That's wow. That's incredible. So I see some questions in here. It's a little bit different, but what are your personal views on ranked choice voting?
I like ranked choice voting. I think it's a way to play around with how we vote. And I think it's an interesting way to get at some voting patterns and some culture that have been really ingrained, that the whole wasted vote, and you have to vote for not your choice, but your least favorite. And it kind of plays with that. I think that ranked choice voting is made more powerful when you allow everybody to participate. I think that ranked choice voting in a system that's still controlled by the parties, that locks out the largest group of voters, is not going to have its desired effect. But I think it's gained a lot of traction as part of the growing recognition that we can't just keep saying campaign finance reform, campaign finance reform, campaign finance reform. We've been saying that since Watergate. We've got to look at actually the structure, and ranked choice voting is an important part of that. I'm personally more focused on who gets to vote, as opposed to what's the system they use once they're in the voting booth. But I think they're very connected, and certainly part of the same movement.
Absolutely. What about paper ballots?
Well, it's funny. I genuinely feel mixed about it, and I feel mixed about it in that we should be able to use the latest technology. We should use blockchain, and we should be able to use good technology to cast ballots. We live in the 21st century. But given that the election agencies are so controlled by partisan hacks, and are so untrustworthy, and they're so politicized, I'm kind of the opinion that having a paper trail makes a difference. And I also am a big believer in vote at home. You just see in Colorado and in Oregon, when you let people vote at home, you get 70% voter turnout. And when people have to go on a Tuesday to a poll, you get much less voter turnout.
How do you vote at home? How does that work?
They mail you the ballot, and then you get
right.
You have like they have checks and balances. The Colorado system is very sophisticated, but your ballot is mailed to you at home, and you have a couple weeks, and you mail it back, or you drop it in a drop box. That's what they do in Oregon. They do it in Colorado, and people love it. They don't have to vote on a Tuesday. They can vote when it's convenient, and they can also sit around. People do this in Colorado. They have parties, and they go over their ballots together, and they talk about the various measures. And you know, it's kind of a social way to vote, which I'm a big fan of. And they've figured out all the security problems with it. It works really, really well, and they get high voter turnout and high voter satisfaction.
And I know in Washington, I interviewed Sarah Smith a few times, and she was saying that there is a way on the ballots when you mail them in to essentially look them up
Yeah.
on the website to
Yeah.
as a tracking number, essentially.
Yeah, it's like UPS.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is really awesome. So
Yeah.
at least you can verify it's been counted.
Yeah.
I'm looking through the comments. What about Diebold, I believe, is the one who makes the voting machines, and I want to say 8 states. They donated to Hillary's campaign. Do you think that I almost fell off my chair?
Yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, should we have some kind of law in place for such a thing?
No, I mean, I just frankly think that people are going to try to buy influence. I don't care what laws you enact. I don't care what regulations you put in place. People will do that. I think we need election agencies like they have in Colorado that are not run by partisan appointees. They're run by professionals, and they're independent, and they're able to design systems and design controls and design mechanisms and purchase machines that are, you know, designed for what's best for the voters. That's their criteria. I think we shouldn't worry about trying to, you know, curtail the lobbying of individual companies. They're going to do it. I don't care what laws you pass. We need to invest in efforts to depoliticize the conducting of elections in this country. And that's a long-term fight. I mean, Jimmy Carter famously once said, because he used to go around the world observing elections, he famously once said that if a country doesn't have an independent electoral agency that's conducting the elections, if the president of the country is the one administering the elections, he wouldn't observe it because it's inherently unfair. There's no way you could have an election observer at every single poll in the whole country, and it's not a fair election because you've got a conflict of interest. You know, the umpires, the Yankees don't get to hire their own umpires. You know, you've got to have some distance between the competitors and the counters. But Diebold's going to do what Diebold's going to do.
Yeah. What do you think about?
Excuse it, but that's just, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. What do you think about? I know Bernard Sanders came out with a bill that he wants automatic voter registration at 18.
Did you just call him Bernard?
I always do. It's a habit.
Really?
I talk to his son on the phone a lot, and it just kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bernard. Never heard that one.
Bernard.
I like automatic voter registration. I think it's important, and in fact, you know, it's one of the things that's driving the huge numbers of independent voters in Oregon. You know, 80% of when people are automatically registered, 80% of them are independents. So I think it's very positive, and I think that you know, it's a good first step. It should be the way things are. You turn 18, you're a registered voter.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about making you know, national holidays for, you know, even if it's just the general?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's important. I think, you know, I think we got to try everything. I think that the American people not just to get on my soapbox here for a minute, I think the American people have to insist that we're going to overhaul our democracy top to bottom. We're going to put in place new systems, new cultures, new practices, new everything. Because we live in a complicated, dangerous world. We have problems that the current kind of two-party setup just it hasn't solved. They've the deal with the American people, you know, up until very recently, the parties basically said, you guys watch your football and take care of your kids, and we'll take care of politics. And you know what? You might even say they made good on that bargain. You might even say it. I don't, you know, but you could make an argument that it worked for a while. It's not working anymore. The two-party setup literally is not working for this country. And you know, so I think things like, hey, let's make Election Day a national holiday. I don't think that's going to somehow solve any problems, but I think it's part of the American people developing their voice that we're going to change this thing. We're going to change every aspect of it. We're going to keep what's good. We're going to try some new things. Some things we'll probably say, didn't really, you know, let's try something else. But this is our democracy. It's ours. And, you know, I think that that's important. And a lot of times political reformers, we sometimes get in these stupid, petty debates like, oh, we shouldn't have an election day holiday. What we should have is, you know, high school education. And people say, no, we shouldn't do that. We should do this. And I'm like, we have to get bigger. We have to end these petty debates. We have to recognize that, hey, we have to support each other and overhaul this thing and support each other in what we're doing, even if we don't think it's the top priority. And do this because it's hard. I mean, the two-party system is very resilient. Make no mistake, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump might not be able to open the government, but the Democrats and Republicans have a lockdown on politics in this country, a lockdown. They make Coke and Pepsi look like amateurs. And restructuring that is not going to be an easy process, and we have to, you know, roll up our sleeves and do it.
Absolutely. So at this point, for the viewers, myself, I'm in Pennsylvania, so I'm really looking forward to something, hopefully.
Yeah, we're working on a plan. We're working on a plan there.
Awesome. Yeah, oh my God. Yes. So as far as, you know, we the people, you know, my viewers or anyone who shares this, what can we do ourselves? Where can we, you know, where can we go? What action can we take?
Okay, this is a simple and a hard one. Simple in that, go to Open Primaries, sign up, join our list, you know, so you can get informed on what we're doing. Here's what I say to people, though, and nobody likes this. I encourage everybody to form a democracy club in your neighborhood. And you don't have to know anything about what you have to do. Form a club. Reach out to 3 friends and say, hey, look, I think our political system needs change. I don't quite know what the solutions are. I want to get educated on what we have to do here in our state, but I need a group of people. We're going to get together the 3rd Thursday of every month. We're going to talk. We're going to come up with a battle plan. You know, maybe that's just reaching out to our local media and our local elected officials and say, what's wrong here? And reaching out to some other civic groups. Form democracy groups, clubs, you know, and get some people in those clubs that you normally wouldn't talk to. You know, get some people that ideologically don't match up. You know, I'm a big believer in we have to learn how to be with the other, respect the other, find ways to work with the other. Create them, and they'll be awkward and they'll be weird and they'll be different. Everyone will be different. But we need a democracy club movement all over the country. I mean, organizations like mine are working really hard and we're starting chapters and there's groups working. But I really think that if there were 10,000 democracy clubs all over the country, the work of these specific reforms would be way ahead of where it is right now. So I really want people to do that, and it ain't going to be easy. If you want to form a gun control club, you could start it in about an hour. It's an established issue. A democracy club, people are like, what? Huh? Fight through that, form it. You'll probably have 3 members on day 1 and 4 members after 6 months. And that's good. And that's fine. That's good. But that's what I encourage people to do, and nobody listens to me, but what the hell.
I think it's an awesome idea, and so does, I see Stephanie in the comments does as well. You guys, you can see the website. Mark pinned it in the comments section, openprimaries.org. So definitely check that out. So many good articles, and like I said, even memes and stuff for the people who don't like to read now, because I know there are some, sadly enough. But thank you so
Sure, my
much
pleasure.
for putting up with all the
I don't know what
electronic
happened,
chaos.
but such is life.
I don't know, but all's well that ends well.
All's well that ends well.
So thank you so much. This is such an important topic. I definitely encourage you to read the comments, because there's a lot, like, people are definitely feeling your
Great.
suggestions and everything. And I think, and touching on some of the comments as well, one of the reasons somebody suggested you to me was because you're not, let's say if you were an outspoken Dem, I wouldn't be comfortable doing this show, because there's something in it for them in a way. So the fact that you are nonpartisan, you're independent and everything, I think that's so important for a movement like this. So it means a lot. That it definitely shows you have the right things in mind. So thank you so much again.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys for sticking around through all the chaos we finally got going. Come join me on Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern, and I have Esha Legal from Twitter. She is a badass who knows pretty much everything about politics and history in the entire universe. She's my go-to. If you say anything about anything, she's like, boom, here's 5 articles within like a nanosecond. She's a lawyer, so she's just badass. So I'm hyped for her as well. So absolutely. Thank you guys for watching. And once more, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.